We're on Matilda, and we are finishing the chapter of Miss Honey's story. We're on page 199. Of course, Miss Honey said, I went to the same school you're going to now, but I lived at home. Miss Honey paused and stared down into her empty tea mug. I think what I'm trying to explain to you, she said, is that over the years I became so completely scared and intimidated by this monster of an aunt that when she gave me an order, no matter what it was, I obeyed it instantly. That can happen, you know. And by the time I was 10, I had become her slave. I did all the housework. I made her bed. I washed and ironed for her. I did all the cooking. I learned how to do everything. But surely you could have complained to somebody, Matilda said. To whom? Miss Honey said. And anyway, I was far too terrified to complain. I told you I was her slave. Did she beat you? Let's not get into details, Miss Honey said. How simply awful, Matilda said. Did you cry nearly all the time? Only when I was alone, Miss Honey said. I wasn't allowed to cry in front of her, but I lived in fear. What happened when you left school? Matilda asked. I was a bright pupil, Miss Honey said. I could easily have got into university, that's college. But there was no question of that. Why not, Miss Honey? Because I was needed at home to do the work. Then how did you become a teacher? Matilda asked. There is a teacher's training college in reading. Miss Honey said, that's only 40 minutes bus ride away from here. I was allowed to go there on condition I came straight home again every afternoon to do the washing and ironing and to clean the house and cook the supper. How old were you then? Matilda asked. When I went into teacher's training, I was 18, Miss Honey said. How could you just you could just have packed up and walked away, Matilda said. Not until I got a job, Miss Honey said. And don't forget, I was by then dominated by my aunt to such an extent that I wouldn't have dared. You can't imagine what it's like to be completely controlled like that by a very strong personality. It turns you into jelly. So that's it. That's the sad story of my life. Now I've talked enough. Please don't stop, Matilda said. You haven't finished yet. How did you manage to get away from her in the end and come and live in this funny little house? That was something, Miss Honey said. I was proud of that. Tell me, Matilda said. Well, Miss Honey said, when I got my teacher's job, the aunt told me I owed her a lot of money. I asked her why. She said, because I've been feeding you all these years and buying your shoes and your clothes. She told me it added up to thousands, and I had to pay her back by giving her my salary, which is all my money, for the next 10 years. I'll give you £1 a week pocket money, she said. But that's all you're going to get. She even arranged with the school authorities to have my salary paid directly into her own bank. She made me sign the paper. You shouldn't have done that, Matilda said. Your salary was your chance of freedom. I know, Miss Honey said. But by then, I had been her slave nearly all my life, and I hadn't the courage or the guts to say no. I was still petrified of her. She could still hurt me badly. So how did you manage to escape? Matilda asked. Miss Honey said, smiling for the first time. That was 2 years ago. It was my greatest triumph. Please tell me, Matilda said. I used to get up very early and go for walks while my aunt was still asleep, Miss Honey said. And one day I came across this tiny cottage. It was empty. I found out who owned it. It was a farmer. I went to see him. Farmers also get up very early. He was milking his cows. I asked him if I could run his cottage. You can't live here, he cried. It's got no conveniences, no running water, no nothing. I want to live here, I said. I'm a romantic. I've fallen in love with it. Please rent it to me. You're mad, he said. Mad means crazy. But if you insist, you're welcome to it. The rent will be 10 pence a week. Here's 1 month's rent in advance, I said, giving him 40 pence. And thank you so much. How super, Matilda cried. So suddenly you had a house all of your own. But how did you pluck up the courage to tell your aunt? That was tough, Miss Honey said, but I steeled myself to do it. One night, After I had cooked her supper, I went upstairs and packed the few things I possessed in a cardboard box and came downstairs and announced I was leaving. I've rented a house, I said. My aunt exploded. Rented a house! She shouted. How can you rent a house when you have only £1 a week in the world? I've done it, I said. And how are you going to buy food for yourself? I'll manage, I mumbled and rushed out the front door. Oh, well done you, Matilda cried. So you were free at last. I was free at last, Miss Honey said. I can't tell you how wonderful it was, but have you really managed to live here on £1 a week for 2 years? Matilda asked. I most certainly have, Miss Honey said. I pay 10 pence of rent, and the rest just about buys me paraffin for my stove and for my lamp, and a little milk and tea and bread and margarine. That's all I really need. As I told you, I have a really good tuck-in at the school lunch. Matilda stared at her. What a marvelously brave thing Miss Honey had done. Suddenly, she was a heroine in Matilda's eyes. Isn't it awfully cold in the winter? She asked. I've got my little paraffin stove, Miss Honey said. You'd be surprised how snug I can make it in here. Do you have a bed, Miss Honey? Well, not exactly, Miss Honey said, smiling again. But they say it's very healthy to sleep on a hard surface. All at once, Matilda was able to see the whole situation with absolute clarity. Miss Honey needed help. There was no way she could go on existing like this indefinitely. You would be a lot better off, Miss Honey, she said, if you gave up your job and drew unemployment money. I would never do that, Miss Honey said. I love teaching. This awful Aunt Matilda said, I suppose she is still living in your lovely old house. Very much so, Miss Honey said. She's still only about 50. She'll be around for a long time yet. And do you think your father really meant for her to own the house forever? I'm quite sure he didn't, Miss Honey said. Parents will often give a guardian the right to occupy the house for a certain length of time, but it is nearly always left in trust for the child. It then becomes a child's property when he or she grows up. Then surely it is your house, Matilda said. My father's will was never found, Miss Honey said. It looks as though somebody destroyed it. No prizes for guessing who, Matilda said. No prizes, Miss Honey said. But if there is no will, Miss Honey, then surely the house goes automatically to you. You are the next of kin. I know I am, Miss Honey said, but my aunt produced a piece of paper supposedly written by my father saying that he leaves the house to his sister-in-law in return for her kindness and looking after me. I am certain it's a forgery, but no one can prove it. Couldn't you try, Matilda said. Couldn't you hire a good lawyer and make a fight of it? I don't have the money to do that, Miss Honey said. And you must remember that this aunt of mine is a much respected figure in the community. She has a lot of influence. Who is she? Matilda asked. Miss Honey hesitated a moment. Then she said softly, Miss Trunchbull. And we're going to stop right there today.